Hey everyone, welcome back. So you've been looking into this whole central banking thing, right? Specifically, like how it plays out in a place like Nigeria.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating area, isn't it? Lots of different viewpoints flying around about whether a central bank can really move the needle on economic development.
Totally. We've got these excerpts here, and they really lay out some contrasting perspectives. Like, can the Central Bank of Nigeria actually make a difference in how the country's economy develops? That's the big question we're going to dive into.
It's a tough one, no doubt about it. I mean, we're talking about a country with a unique set of challenges and opportunities.
Right. Like, on one hand, you've got folks like, there's this guy, Mr. Fisher, who's quoted in the source. He seems pretty doubtful about the whole thing. Thinks it's a tall order for a central bank to really be an engine for development.
Yeah, and I think some of that skepticism comes from, well, historically, central banks haven't always been super successful at balancing development goals with their more traditional roles.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, they're usually focused on keeping inflation under control,
Right.
right? And managing the currency.
Exactly. So when you add development goals into the mix, things can get pretty complicated. It's like trying to juggle a bunch of different balls at the same time.
Oh, for sure. But hang on, the excerpts also bring up these many finance experts who seem to think the Central Bank of Nigeria can actually foster development.
Yeah, they do, don't they? It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
But there are definitely some caveats, right? Like,
Hmm.
they emphasize this idea that the central bank needs to be, like, well adapted to Nigeria's economic landscape, which, let's be real, is always changing.
Totally. And I think well adapted in this context means being able to respond to things like fluctuations in oil prices,
Yeah.
since oil is a big deal for Nigeria's economy, or shifts in global demand for their exports.
So if we're talking well adapted, what would that actually look like in practice? Like, for the Central Bank of Nigeria specifically?
Okay, well, picture this. A huge chunk of Nigeria's population relies on agriculture, right? But a lot of these farmers are small scale and they have trouble accessing credit.
Yeah, they can't just walk into a bank and get a loan easily.
Exactly. So, a well adapted central bank might step in and create programs specifically designed to provide these farmers with affordable loans. Or maybe even partner up with microfinance institutions that already have a presence in rural communities.
Okay, so it's about being creative and finding ways to target support where it's needed most.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point from the excerpts, this whole idea of prudent financial behaviors. It's kind of a warning, isn't it?
It does sound a little ominous, like, watch out.
Well, it's a reminder that even with the best intentions, things can go wrong. Corruption, mismanagement of funds, you name it.
Which would obviously undermine any development efforts.
For sure. So, building strong institutions, promoting transparency, and having robust systems in place to prevent corruption, these are all essential. And that goes beyond just the central bank itself. It's about the whole financial ecosystem.
It's like you need a solid foundation for the house to stand, right?
Absolutely. And people need to trust the system. If they don't believe their money is being used responsibly, they're less likely to participate in the formal economy, which is a huge obstacle to development.
So we've got this tension, right, between the folks who are skeptical about a central bank's ability to drive development and those who see the potential, but with some big ifs attached.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway here?
I think the main takeaway is that it's complicated. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Every country's different. And like we were saying before, central banks have to walk a tightrope between their traditional responsibilities and these development goals.
Right, so no magic bullet.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean central banks can't be a force for positive change.
Exactly. Especially in a place like Nigeria, which has so much economic potential waiting to be unlocked.
Totally. This has been super insightful. So last question. If you could give one piece of advice to the folks over at the Central Bank of Nigeria, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a tough one. But if I had to pick one thing, I'd say focus on building strong institutions.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that mean in concrete terms?
Well, it means making sure the central bank itself is transparent and accountable. It means having a financial sector that's well regulated and operates with integrity. And it means a commitment to good governance across the board.
Right, so it's about creating a system that people can trust. Because without trust, it's hard to make any real progress.
Exactly. And once you have that foundation in place, the possibilities for economic development really open up.
Makes sense. So there you have it, folks. It's
Yeah.
a complex issue, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a good starting point for understanding the role central banks can play in economic development. And who knows, maybe some of you will be advising the Central Bank of Nigeria someday.
That would be awesome.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.